Welcome to the PreSales Podcast. It's your host and PreSales Collective General Manager, Chris Mabry. Today, I'm speaking with David Duffett, Telecom pre-sales engineer turned award-winning speaker and coach. David founded Let the Geek Speak and has presented numerous keynotes to technical sales organizations and more. You may remember him from our Elevate and Engage Summit as the keynote for the day here at PreSales Collective. The title for today's episode is Techie Turbo, Accelerating Personal Achievement Through Comm Skills, where we'll be diving into David's 7 power presenting protocols, his love for helping us technical folks create structure and frameworks for making impact in our presentations. We talk about why technical people are not always the best communicators, how our ability to connect and engage affects our perceived value, where a little change can make massive difference, and his love for the British motor company, Jaguar. There's so many golden nuggets here. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thank you for tuning in. David Duffett, welcome to the PreSales Podcast.
It's great to be here, Chris. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate.
Yeah, me too. You know, you gave the keynote on Elevate Summit, and ever since I wanted to have another conversation with you, especially in the podcast format, because I feel like you just have a lot more to offer.
Well, I love to talk. And I love to help the pre-sales community. So let's hope that those two things coincide right now.
I'd like to start off by asking you, what's exciting in your life? Like, you have so much going on. We'll get into it in the conversation. But is there a new opportunity that you're exploring, something that's happening in David Duffett's world that you want to share?
Well, I do like to get out there and speak. And last year, I had the opportunity to benchmark my speaking skills against normal people. I was aware that I could do speeches in the technical realm, but I thought, wouldn't it be great to kind of see how these go in the normal world, if you like? And so I entered a speaking contest, a national speaking contest, and I won the sort of regional heat, and then I won the national championship against all sorts of different people, from a TV magician who does an amazing story about personal transformation to a double Olympian who does a brilliant talk about resilience and, you know, achieving in the face of adversity. And I won that contest, and part of the prize was to actually be on the main stage at the following year's one. And so that's the Speaking Summit 2024 here in the UK, coming up, a very nice venue in the Cotswolds. And I will have some time on main stage there. So I'm really looking forward to preparing for that. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn the telescope the opposite way round. And instead of teaching geeks how to speak to normal people, for want of a better expression, I'm going to give my audience an insight into how to communicate best with technical people.
That's amazing. I'm thankful the contest wasn't like in the Olympic sphere or anywhere else, right?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating experience, but there was no blood spilt or bones broken, so called it a win.
What was your number one takeaway on perceived value of speeches, or something that you did differently that these individuals who sound like really accomplished or probably great as well?
Really amazing people. And actually, the two people I mentioned, both afterwards got me speaking gigs elsewhere.
No.
The magician, who's called Kevin Quantum, check him out on YouTube, Kevin Quantum. He hooked me up with a gig at the Bayes Centre, which is an adjunct of the University of Edinburgh. And the other guy, the double Olympians, Chris Cook, lovely guy, he hooked me up with a gig speaking to the London Internet Exchange, 150 hardcore ISP type people. The thing about it was only a 5-minute speech. So to bring something compelling and complete within 5 minutes is quite a challenge. And you're marked on your script, your stagecraft, your engagement, the bookability of what you do. And I think that was a key fact, because I had such a tightly defined audience. Mine were technical people. The talk was called Why Geeks Need to Speak. And it was for young engineers, how to accelerate their careers by being better presenters and public speakers. So it was a very focused talk, and that allowed the judges to mark me, on bookability, amongst other things.
Oh, fascinating. And you're right. Going deep into a subject or being extremely, extremely cautious on how specific your audience is or your topic. I run into this creating a lot of content here at PreSales Collective. It's super important. People kind of know how to engage with it.
Yes. In fact, I've been doing a little bit of a tour of the region since I won it. And I've been doing a showcase of my sort of broader talk. And one of the questions that comes up is from people aspiring to get into it's called the Speaker Factor contest. What can you give me to help me on my Speaker Factor journey when they're competing this year? And I'd say actually that the most important thing is having a tightly defined audience and making sure that your message resonates with them, because then the judges can see where you're heading and they can give you a score on bookability, because you could do a brilliant talk, but if it's not particularly aimed at anyone specifically, it's so much more difficult to judge.
When I think of pre-sales solutions, that's really specific for us too. I mean, if you're talking to our CRO, if you're talking to a head of engineering, if you're working with strategic internal partners, you're going to have a very different audience, a very different set of KPIs, measurable outcomes and interests, and understanding how to pitch what you're either selling or, the problem you're trying to solve in a very concise way is super important.
Absolutely. And what happens, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later on in this podcast, but what tends to happen is generically somebody that's amazing technically finds their way into a pre-sales role, and all of a sudden they need to communicate with all of these different people that you're talking about. And they've perhaps never had to go through that thought process about how to tailor a message for different types of people in order to best engage with them.
Right. That's an exciting award. Congratulations. I want to take a step into your journey, because now you're a speaker, you are a founder, you are probably insert 5 other titles. You're all over pre-sales and tons of other areas. What got you started? Maybe you haven't had a direct pre-sales career journey, but walk us through that journey. Walk us through your process in getting to where you are today.
Yeah, I've always liked communicating. That's just one thing I've always loved doing, from being a very young boy fiddling about with two-way radio and CB, and even building pirate radio transmitters as a young lad. And
how dare you?
Recording little programs and things like that. But my first kind of more formal role that took me in this direction was as an instructor for the Civil Aviation Authority, a bit like your Federal Aviation Authority over there. And my job was to teach people in airports and air traffic control centres how to fault find and repair the equipment that was used for air-ground communication. So, transmitters and receivers and audio selection devices and things like that. And what I felt at the time, I really enjoyed it, but I was surrounded by really brilliant technical people, and I actually felt not technical enough. Although I could learn all the things I needed to do to give the training, a lot of my colleagues seemed to have this almost insatiable appetite for lots of technical details far beyond what we really needed to know. And I could never really muster the mental energy to go that deep. And it worried me a bit. But of course, as I've got older and a bit more comfortable in my skin, I've come to understand that my pendulum didn't swing all the way up in that direction, because actually it swung more than some of those people's in more of the kind of interpersonal communications direction. And so some of these people were really into the tech and perhaps less able in the kind of instructional role. And I was kind of more in the middle ground. And what I've come to over the years is that hardcore technical people, in a lot of cases, need some assistance in tuning their message. And like we were saying, actually refining it for different types of audiences as well.
Man, we have so much in common there. Now, you run an organization called Let the Geek Speak. If the geeks didn't want to speak, or maybe they didn't like to speak, or maybe they were happy in the technical corner, why do you want to try to push them into it? Are you trying to get them to be able to speak better?
That's a great question, Chris. And the answer is I'm not trying to push anybody into anything, because if you don't want to do it and you don't have the level of desire, then it's just not going to make any sense. Let me give you a bit of an analogy. Imagine somebody going to the gym and pumping iron with just one arm. That's all they ever do, is pump that iron with one arm, and they end up with this massive muscle on one side. And it could be that they didn't do the other arm because they were so focused on this arm. Or it could be that they simply didn't want to do that arm and they made a conscious decision not to do it, and they really didn't like that arm. So you could have somebody right now who's really clever technically and has found themselves a pre-sales role. And back in the day, they weren't interested at all in interpersonal communications, but now all of a sudden they are. Or it could be that they were just focusing on one area at the expense of others in their lives. But if they are the kind of people you just described and they simply don't want to, they don't want to do that, then they're best off sticking with that sort of, maybe hardware engineering, software engineering, and not needing to communicate with too many people. So I'm all about helping people, but of course they've got to want to be helped in the first place.
Yeah. You said something during the keynote that I'll bring back up and resurface. And this is on YouTube for anybody who's listening. I can put it in the show notes. Have you ever seen someone that was not achieving the level of success that their technical skills and abilities said they should? And then you change one letter and explain that. So can you do it for the audience? What is the one letter you would change?
Yes. It's, have you ever been someone that was not achieving the level of success that your technical skills and abilities said that you should? And that really is where my passion lies, because in working in a few technical companies, in fact, a lot of technical companies, I've seen so many people that were so clever and so on it with their technical skills, and yet they were kind of diluted, if you like, by their inability to communicate. And I thought, I want to help these people achieve more, because I noticed that the geeks in the corner of the office weren't flying to Florida when they made President's Club. They weren't having expensed BMWs and things like that. And yet they were making the very things that the whole company revolved around. And I certainly didn't want to detract or take anything away from the sales guys. Sales guys and girls are great. They do a very, very necessary job. Without them, you're not going to get anywhere. However, I just wanted to see the technical people better rewarded. And I thought the place where I can help is in showing them how to communicate their value more clearly.
And in communicating their value more clearly, do you feel like this is part of your mission in a way? It kind of sounds to me like this is your why. I like to get into, why did David Duffett take this wild adventure and create this company and travel the world? You could be working at a Fortune 500 company today, training their teams, making a killing, having a great life. What is it that helped you choose this bumpy, wild road of entrepreneurship?
I think you hit it just there, Chris. It was seeing people that I knew were so much more technically superior to me, not making their way kind of up the ladder, if you like, when they wanted to, and they didn't have those skills. And I thought I would like to help. What happened was, like you said, I've been privileged to go to many different parts of the world and be part of many different technical conferences. And I met lots of people who were very nice people, knew exactly what they were talking about, but didn't seem to quite hit it off in the communicating that with other people part. And I thought they need help, and I could be the man to help them.
I'm shaking my head because I think so many people in our audience are sitting there resonating with this, whether we wanted to help those around us or we were in that boat ourselves where we thought, I know this product so well, I can either go into product management, but if I do go into product management, I kind of lose the aspect of closing deals and being in the go-to-market force, which has an energy to it. And then I chose to go into management because I thought, okay, how can I help other individuals see their blind spots and help them grow in this area? Many people we work with in our organizations that are far more technical, they do struggle with this, but I will just go ahead and get on my soapbox and say that they should go to club too. So I'm a huge solutions and pre-sales to club advocate.
Me too. I believe that if people are contributing to the sale, they should be rewarded as such. And I've had many conversations about this, but actually, and coincidentally, one of the most enlightening was with somebody at this speaker summit last year where I won the contest. Just happened to be waiting in reception together, and we struck up a conversation, and it turned out that he'd run a software company, and he was saying that in order to solve the pre-sales and sales compensation conundrum, what he'd do is actually say, look, there's this much commission in the deal. You pre-sales people and you salespeople go away, talk to each other and come up with a solution that you're happy with to kind of split it in a way that you feel represents your contribution, that you can live with. And what he said was, number one, the salespeople were much more generous than he thought they were going to be in the commission split. And number two, it was sustainable because everybody was bought in and committed.
That's a unique version for sure. I don't know how scalable that is. Was this at like a large scale, a small scale? I mean, that seems pretty like there's a lot of gray area there.
I couldn't comment exactly on the size, but I know he went on to sell the company. So obviously somebody was very interested in it and bought it. But yeah, quite a fascinating thing. And, obviously there's lots of wrinkles in there, but I'm a firm believer that everybody who contributes should be rewarded in a proportionate way.
What do you think is holding some people back? I mean, geez, I know some incredibly smart technical people in my sphere who would ran circles around me all day long in the technical side of our products and the back ends. And like you said, had this insatiable desire to like learn way deeper than I ever did. To me, it felt like a lot of work. And to them, it just felt like an additional layer that they needed to understand. What do you think is holding people back? There's nervousness, there's fear of speaking. What's your take on this? Because I mean, you focus on this subject a lot. Do you think the fear of speaking is massive? Is it too big of a leap for technical people to kind of get over?
I think people say that, but actually, I think when you kind of peel back a layer or two, it's not a fear of speaking in public, but it's more a fear of being ill prepared in front of a group of people. And of course, you can see those in the kind of same sphere, but where I major is helping technical people get a level of clarity about what they're going to do when they get in front of people by having structure and having proper preparation and practice that means that they're not in that boat of feeling ill prepared anymore. What I've found is that most technical people like to have not necessarily rules, but they like to have a framework in which to operate. They've learned the rules of a particular software language and the syntax and how the constructs go together. If they're electronics people, they've learned the rules of electronics and how to create prototypes and swap out components. And so what I do is bring that kind of mindset into presentations and give a framework for either the creation or the optimization of an existing presentation such that they come to a place where they feel happy with it and can be enthusiastic and positive. But again, it's if they want to, there has to be a level of desire there.
You have what's called the 7 power presenting protocols. It's kind of hard for me to get out. Is this part of like that framework you designed?
Exactly. Yes. The 7 power presenting protocols were put together to allow anybody to take an idea that they have and craft it into a powerful presentation if they just step through those 7 protocols. So the first one is purpose. It's all about thinking about the purpose of the presentation that you're going to make. And you must think about it on at least 2 levels. There's the narrow scope of the actual presentation or demo. So it could be, to familiarize the audience with your software such that they can determine whether it's a good fit for what they need or not. Or it could be to teach people the top 5 features of this new product. That's just the presentation, but there'll be a wider business level objective. And so in the case of a demo, the wider business level objective for the client, and that's where we should be focused, might be on streamlining the processes within their organization. It might be on making efficiency savings. There's lots of things it might be. When we think about teaching somebody about a product, the wider business level goal might be to reduce the number of tech support phone calls because we train people better about the product in the first place. And so we need to think on these levels. And of course, to actually get to this, we need to talk to the people we're going to present to. The purpose is all about actually talking to the audience before you ever do the presentation. Say, look, I'm coming to you next Tuesday to do this demo. And I was thinking to cover A, B, and C. What do you think? And so, to have a conversation so that there's a massive overlap. In fact, if it was a Venn diagram, the 2 circles would be on top of each other of what you deliver and what your audience wants and needs. So that's the purpose protocol. I won't go into so much detail on the others, otherwise we could be here for hours. But actually, in my coaching and training programs, there's a full hour on each of the individual protocols. So there's a lot of depth there.
Yeah.
That's purpose.
That reminds me of just the term we all use today, which is discovery, building a framework around it. Now, some people, I think, like to think of content or presenting more creatively. And this was actually my pitfall too, is I would think about things like helping marketing write content and helping this program here or doing a video webinar for my company as more of a creative outlet. Yeah. Like you just sit down and you write it out, right? But that's not the case. And it's actually not really the best way to prepare content. A lot of the time you have to build that sort of framework that mechanizes it for you and tells you what to do next. So I like to find myself in a process where there's a step and it tells me what to do next. So I can walk through the steps and at the end create the outcome that I desire. It sounds sort of similar.
Yeah, and purpose, of course, is where that begins. And of course, it's not just the audience, but there's another party in the loop that I call the sponsor, and that's the person that asks you to do the presentation. So it could be your AE, it could be your boss, it could be a conference organizer that's asked you to do a presentation. And the idea is to tie all three parties, you that's delivering the presentation or demo, the audience, and the person that asks you, to tie all three in so that expectations are met and there are no surprises. That's what purpose is all about. Planning is just constructing a presentation to take advantage of what we know about the human attention span and the way memory and recall works, and how we can work with that to deliver something that's got the key points in all the right places, piques people's attention when we need it to be piqued, and it just works in with the way people work in general. And surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, lots of people create presentations without ever thinking about that. And so they don't put all of the key information in the right places. And I'll give you a classical example of this, is when people finish a session with Q&A. The end of a session is a very, very important place. It's where your call to action, your key messages, your next steps, something powerful should be at the end of the presentation, but instead people squander it on Q&A. You know, maybe there's no questions, or maybe somebody asks a real left field question, takes the conversation off in a strange direction. Then everybody leaves with this weird thought, you know, that was a bit random in their minds as they leave, rather than your key points or the action you wanted them to take. And so understanding how attention spans work is, I think, key.
That's applicable in meetings too. You know, a lot of people say, I'm going to do a company-wide presentation, and at the end, we'll take questions and answers. And often I think people feel really awkward when it's quiet and there's nobody asking questions. And so they'll kind of like conjure up a question that maybe it makes them feel like they're engaging in the content and it's out of left field. And then you see the people on stage or on Zoom kind of react like, well, we'll answer it, but it doesn't really hit the point that we were trying to make.
Yeah, as we might say here in England, Chris, you're bang on the money there. Let's rerun that. Let's imagine we're handling questions before we summarize or before we come to our key points. If we get that kind of question that takes things off in a bit of a weird direction, say, yeah, that's a great question. It's slightly outside the scope of what we're doing here. Listen, what I'm going to do is summarize the key points, and then I'm going to come and speak to you afterwards and go through that with you. And so you don't need to derail things and, you know, serve this weird question in front of everybody and kind of distract them. It's a case of having a framework. But yeah, that's such a good point, that sometimes kind of people interact for the sake of it, or they feel sorry for you because there's no questions. And of course, if that is the case, you don't have to do that namby-pamby excuse about, oh, I must have handled it so well that there are no questions. No questions. Great. Let me come on to the big finish. Let me give you the key points. And then you finish it on your own terms and leave people with all of the meatiest information that you want to pack in to that very important part of the end.
I love that. It's one of my, I would say, pet peeves. And if you're listening, maybe this is one of those things not to do. I try not to do this myself, but when you get to the end of it and there's no questions, don't say, well, I must have done everything right. It just doesn't work. I think it's awkward.
What I find is when I'm speaking at a multi-speaker conference and there's an MC, I have to brief them and say, look, I am not taking questions at the end of my presentation. I will be dealing with them near the end. Maybe if it's a smaller group, I'll deal with them as we go along. But please understand, when I get to the end, that is the end. There's no Q&A afterwards, because I want to finish at the most important point.
You did the same thing when we were prepping for the summit here at PreSales Collective. We were already sort of on that track a little bit, but I loved how you said, Chris, this is how it's going to go. We're going to do questions at this point. Not only did you give me instructions, which I liked, because hosting a summit it's a lot of back-to-back work. And sometimes it's hard to listen while you're doing it. And I find myself going, okay, what's the next thing to do? And you set that stage appropriately. And maybe that's one of my number one takeaways for this episode so far is, if you're working with your sales staff, if you're working with your counterparts, as a solutions consultant, set the stage and say, here is what I'm going to do. Don't take questions at the end. Let's take questions 5 minutes before we finish. You be the one who runs that show with your AE.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you do end up speaking at conferences, that's part of the package, if you like, of being a professional speaker, is to properly brief the MC, the host, and to let them know exactly what's going to happen. And of course, at the front end, to give them an introduction, because if you don't hand over an introduction for them to read, they're going to kind of pull something off YouTube or LinkedIn or make something up. And so just giving people a couple of lines by way of an introduction is also a nice thing to do if you end up speaking at a multi-speaker conference.
It's really great for them because they don't have to guess. I've actually seen this at a couple of companies I've worked at, which is like the call for introductions. You have to basically write your little story so people know how to introduce you. At the very least, we should be giving our sales counterparts a 2-sentence blurb on why we're the ones you called in to help.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, there's so many things that you as a presenter can do to make life easier for the people that you're working with. And guess what? If you do that, they'll want to work with you again. You make their life easier, then it's a check in the right box, isn't it?
Yeah. You kind of bridge this gap between two different questions I had asked, which is the public speaking, fear sort of part of it, and what we can do to better prompt a host or a speaker that is going to present us. Why do you think that framework is so important? We want to set people up for success. We want to set ourselves up for success. But let's say you have a solution consultant title. Why do you need to do all that? Why can't you just jump into it and talk?
Because the chances are you're going to forget something, or maybe not even have the thought process around it. And so to be prompted to go through that thought process, even if you just look at it and go, yeah, I've got that one done, I don't need to actually spend any time thinking about that particular part. Just have a kind of a little checklist, even a mental checklist, is an important thing to do. Because, like I said, so many people, when they're asked to do a presentation, will just jump on the PowerPoint deck and think, yeah, if I just move that slide, I'm going to hide that one. I'm going to put a new title on. I'll add a couple at the end. And of course, that is not a presentation. It's a collection of visual aids to support your presentation. You need to step back, matey, and think about the purpose of this presentation, not start PowerPoint slide juggling acts. So yeah, this is all in the sort of purpose and the plan. What I like to say is your slide should be the absolute last thing you think about before you get to the presentation, not the first thing. Because there's so many stages to go through. If you want to do a really good presentation, there's so many stages to go through before you commit anything to your PowerPoint or Prezi or Keynote or whatever deck you're using.
I have a saying that a demo is not a presentation, it's a process. It's a process to be discovered. It's a process to work through. You're working through that. I fell into this myself. I love building out my presentations and my demo environments, and I want to make sure every T is crossed, every I is dotted, the colors are right, et cetera, et cetera. I go to a go-to-market leadership offsite. It's one of my first ever, so I'm kind of the new kid in the room, just excited to be there. Can't wait to meet all these smart people, and they were. And I love being in rooms with smart people. I give a presentation, it goes well. Everybody else does. The CEO comes in, and I think he just got off the plane. He walks in with one of those huge paper rolls that you can just roll over. You know what I'm talking about? That, you write something and you roll it over like a magician. Maybe your magician friend has one of these. He walks in, he slams it on the thing. He has a permanent marker. He starts just writing on it. This was his platform. He had no computer with him. I don't even know if he brought it. And he gave the best presentation I'd seen in years. Maybe one of the best I've seen.
Brilliant.
And he just used a piece of paper, a marker he probably got from the front desk. It was one of those moments where I thought, man, maybe I'm doing it wrong. The platform at which he was presenting didn't even matter. His content was so good. It didn't matter if he put it on a Post-it note.
It's the way we should all be thinking, Chris. We should really be putting the meat of our energy into the message and thinking about the way we convey the message later. I mean, you might even consciously think that having a flip chart and being able to roll over is actually best for this particular message that I'm giving, because I want to be able to review and pull it back and show people, what we did half an hour ago or whatever.
Yeah.
Or when you want to draw things out. I remember seeing an excellent demonstration on a flip chart where the speaker had actually already drawn a map of the UK on the flip chart in a very light pencil that only he could see. So he turned to the audience and said, let's imagine, we're going to divide up the UK. And he hand drew this very accurate map, and people were quite amazed. And of course, all he was really doing is following the line that he'd already put on there. But to the audience, it looked like he'd, from memory, drawn this amazing map of the UK. That was a very powerful technique.
That's awesome. We're looking forward to doing some whiteboarding content here at PreSales Collective, because I think it's a great tool, but that could be a really good trick
a bit of fun. We better march on with those power presenting protocols, Chris, because we're only on number 2.
Right.
So the third one after plan is preferences. This actually goes back to something you said right at the beginning. It's all about considering the different types of people we're going to be working with. And so if we are delivering a presentation to a room full of hardcore technical people, support engineers or whatever, we would do that in a different way to if we were dealing with a bunch of people from the HR department that are just going to be kind of end users of the software, for example. They're not looking after any integrations. They're just kind of working with the system. But sadly, so many people don't even think about the audience. What happens is they don't even have the thought process, but subconsciously they're thinking, right, I learn best by doing. That's always the way I've learned best. So what I'm going to do is, from the word go, I'm going to put the mouse in their hands, and I'm not going to give them too much input. I'm going to let them kind of get on with it, because that's the way they'll learn best. And of course, it might well not be the way they'll learn best.
Right.
And so I have to coach people through a process of not only self-awareness about our own preferred styles for receiving, digesting, and maybe implementing the information that we hear, but to be cognizant of the fact that if we're not careful, we're going to foist that on other people. And we need to spend time finding out about our audience in a kind of, not know your customer, know your audience kind of way, and do something that's going to be best for them. And the kind of corollary of that is, if you can't find out exactly what kind of people they are, then you can either take an educated guess. You can talk to somebody that does know the audience if you can't get direct access to them. So a classical case would be a conference organizer. You're not going to be able to make contact with everybody that's going to show up in the room or in the virtual room for your session. So you can say to the organizer, what kind of people do you generally get? I want to build up the way. And the other thing to do is, if you really have no idea, is to build different modes and means within your presentation or demo so that you cater for everybody. So you might do a little bit of an exercise where you put the mouse in their hands, but you might do something else where you just brainstorm on people's previous, or things that come up when people think about their previous engagements with an HR system or whatever it might be, so that you let them kind of bring something to it, because different people will appreciate different ways of doing things. So that's preferences. It's really kind of trying to find out as much as you can about not only what your customer needs, that was in the purpose and the plan, but how they need it conveyed to them.
Do you think that also gives you an opportunity to do a little discovery? And if you're in a format where you can ask questions, because if sometimes you're not, sometimes you're doing a webinar and you just feel like you're talking into your computer. Do you feel like that's a moment where you can say, hey, how do you learn best?
Yeah, you can be over like that, or you can embed it in a more broad question. So for instance, I could say, Chris, coming over to do a demo to you and your team next Tuesday, I want to make sure I do the absolute best job for you. So just cast your mind back. Tell me about the best demo you've ever had in your life, when you couldn't wait to buy the software or do the thing or whatever it was. Tell me about that. And then the person tells you, and you can say, what else? Because there's so much power in a what else. People don't always give you the best information first. In fact, it's a really amazing experience that you can put yourself through, and it's so educational. It could be a simple question like, what's the most important thing to you about this software I'm going to demo? And they'll say something. You can say, well, what else? And then they say something, what else? And you keep going on the what else is until they say, that's it. And then when you say, you just give me these 4 or 5 points, but, if you had to pick one as the most important, what would it be? It's never the first one. And it just makes you smile, because it's never the first thing they said, or almost never. And so it just shows you that you have to drill down a little bit. Even in the discovery for doing a demo, then this is why I'm such a big fan of sales engineers and solution architects and all of these people actually being part of the discovery. Because to have some information secondhand from an account executive who says, yeah, I got the impression that they're people that learn by doing, that's not quite as good as talking to people yourself and getting a real handle on things.
And they're going to convey that in a very different lens, because I would say my opinion is that the account executive, they're in charge of revenue. That's what they're in charge of. And they're going to see things in the eyes of revenue. And that might not give you that bit that you need to know about how they consume content, how they learn, what other champions you need to get on board.
Exactly. I think there's so much power in the pre-sales person being involved in discovery, because at the end of the day, we're a team, aren't we? We're all on the same team. We're all, aimed at the same goal. And so why shouldn't we get involved a little bit more? And actually, without kind of jumping too deep into the rabbit hole, this brings us onto the subject of communication in general between pre-sales and sales. And sweeping generalization here, but the account executive might be the more outgoing, gregarious type of person that's jumping in there, making relationships. If things go wrong, they're more likely to point the finger in somebody else's direction. Whereas the pre-sales person might be a bit less gregarious, a bit less outgoing, and perhaps more likely to take any criticism or finger pointing kind of on the chin and try and do better next time round. And so I think there's a huge amount of room for pre-sales people to become a little bit more assertive, not aggressive, but a little bit more assertive in their communication, to work towards the win-win in the relationship, which is sometimes dysfunctional, between sales and pre-sales.
There's so much truth in everything you just said, David. And I would actually advise to do it in a way that focuses on the customer. Do it in a way that focuses on the outcome. What I've seen is a lot of solution engineers will say that they'll get, more assertive. And really what they're saying is they're saying no a lot more frequently. They're really being a little bit more aggressive than I think helps sometimes. But focusing on the revenue or the customer's outcomes, like saying, no, Johnny, I can't do another discovery call with that prospect because frankly, I just don't believe that they're an appropriate opportunity. I don't think that they're going to buy our software.
That's very fair. Or another example might be to say, look, I really want to help you on this. However, in order to get the customer to the decision fastest and to, close things down, I'm not the best person to do this demo because I don't know enough about it, or I can't generate enough personal enthusiasm about this particular thing that you think is important to them right now. So talk to Mary across the corridor or talk to Jim. I want to help. I'm just not the best person in this particular case.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not the best resource for you for this stage at this time for this end goal.
Yeah.
So we've covered 3.
We'd better move on, haven't we?
Well, what I would like to do is just give us a teaser on the rest, because of course, people are going to reach out. We're going to, consume your content afterwards. So just give us a rundown of the rest of them. And then I want to move into how do we do this in our voice? Why is it important for us to be ourselves in these processes and communication?
Yes.
And then we'll wrap it up.
All right. So the fourth one is practice. That's getting out there and doing some practicing, hopefully to valued colleagues who can critique you on both style and content. But if not, maybe enthusiastic family members, or maybe even to your cell phone. But there's a lot of power in practicing out loud, not looking at the PowerPoint deck and thinking, I must remember to say that on slide 5. That's not real practice, folks. You've got to say it out loud. After practice, it's participation. And participation is number 5 protocol. And that's important because no one likes having things done to them. They want things done for them or with them. And so by involving people in your demo or in your presentation, you're going to get more commitment to the outcomes that are good for everybody. That's participation. Then the number 6 one is performance. That's actually getting out there and doing it and making use of all of your faculties. And do remind me, after we've done this, we need to come back to that important point you said about being yourself. Because in the performance, it's very important to be yourself, not try to spend time being somebody else, but use your voice, your body, your pitches, your pace, your pause. You can do all sorts of things with your voice and your body to accentuate a performance. And then the 7th power presenting protocol is post-event. You've often heard your sales colleagues say the fortune is in the follow-up. And yet so often we don't follow up properly after presentations and demos. And so my framework has a kind of formal process for that, which actually harks back to the purpose that you discussed and agreed at the very beginning and kind of goes round in a bit of a loop with that. So those are the 7 power presenting protocols, Chris.
I mean, I want to go through it myself.
I do genuinely believe that it will either take somebody from never having done a presentation to doing something brilliant, or it allows them to use each of those protocols as a lens to look at an existing presentation, say, have I mapped out the plan of this presentation properly, or could I do something more powerful in the structure? Did I really consider the preferences of the people I'm going to serve, or have I just done it the way I like doing it? You can use each of them to look at an existing presentation and optimize it.
So how to go through this process and still be yourself is a challenge, because a lot of the time we look at frameworks and we think, well, that's what good looks like. And I do like bringing up and showing what good looks like, because I think it gives people a bar and kind of elevates your idea of where you can go. But it's so hard not to try to emulate it. And I believe trying to be genuine to yourself, trying to be yourself through the process, it actually makes a real connection. But why do you think it's important? And do you have any tips on people who feel like they're not sure about just being their whole selves, especially at work?
It's so important to be yourself. That's actually the second biggest thing. After the I'm scared of speaking in public, which is really I'm scared of stepping out ill-prepared in front of a group of people. The next thing is I feel I need to be somebody else. I've seen a great presentation. The person was funnier, louder, quieter, more serious, whatever. They were different to me. And so I feel I need to be a bit like that person. The truth is so far from that. The truth is you need to be you. It's a very overused word, Chris, but authenticity is the key here, being true to your real self. And so that's why those 7 power presenting protocols are not a recipe. They're not a formula. They're a framework for you as an individual to go through and do what you believe you need to do in each of those parts to be true to yourself. Let me give you an example of that. I worked many years ago for a telecoms company, and I was doing presentation skills for the whole company, including the facilities manager, who was also the health and safety guy. And he was not a loud and out there sort of person, but his name was Keith. Still remember him to this day, Keith Green. He had quite a good sense of humor. It's a little bit dry, and it was sort of a quiet, funny kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so we worked on his introduction because, of course, one of the things you need to do at the beginning of anything is to grab people's attention and kind of draw them in to show them why they need to listen to you. Otherwise, they'll carry on looking at their phone or, doing whatever they were doing, talking to the person next to them. And so I worked with Keith, and Keith came out to do his presentation. He kind of sat on the edge of a desk and he said, "Hands up if you want the afternoon off." And of course, everybody's hand went, everybody loved the afternoon off. Sure. And then he said, "In hospital, because that's where you're going to be if you don't spend these next 15 minutes with me going through these very important health and safety points to make sure you stay safe while you're doing your software engineering or whatever it is here at work." And, it was just a nice little introduction that fitted him. He didn't walk out on the stage to massive music going, yeah. He was him. So, yeah, very important to be yourself, but also to do the things that you need to do to support yourself. So, as an example, if you are a quieter person and you know you're going to be speaking in a bigger room, bring along a little bit of amplification. Could be as simple as a little radio lav mic and one of those Bluetooth speakers if you're a really quiet person.
Yeah.
If you're very loud and out there, perhaps you don't need it. But cater for the way you are, be you, and let the audience warm to you. In fact, I don't know whether you've ever noticed this, but if you go and see any kind of show, it doesn't matter whether it's a music show, a band performing, what they're doing is they're inviting you into their world. And the people that get most from it are the people that step into that world.
Right.
And so if you think about inviting people into your world to do your demo, they're going to get the most out of it if they sort of come in there with you.
Yeah, so well said. A friend of mine named Brett Baldwin once told me that everybody says stupid stuff sometimes. And I think I was like a little afraid of kind of tripping over myself at some point. And he's like, "Man, it's okay. Everybody does it. It's just part of the game." For some reason, that comment stuck with me. And I was like, if you ever feel like you don't land, everybody does that. And that's just a normal part of this, and helped me be myself.
Very much. People will warm to your humanity because at the end of the day, we're all people, aren't we? And we like to hang out with people. We like to buy from people. As the well-worn phrase goes, we like to buy from people that we know, we like, and we trust. And if somebody wants to give off a vibe of infallibility and brilliance, we're probably not going to trust them. But if people, have a problem with the clicker or something and they just, own it and carry on, they're human, aren't they?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to the rapid fire. I have a few more questions. Then we'll talk about where people can find and connect with you. First question is, And you spend a lot of time focused on communication and speaking. So I'm really interested in your answer. What are some of your biggest pet peeves when you see solution engineering? We're in the pre-sales game here at PreSales Collective. When you see a demo, what is your number one pet peeve or something that really just strikes you?
I think if I was to kind of put a few things actually inside one hopper, it's a lack of self-awareness. When people come out, and I'm going to bring a cliche into play here. When I've been in America, I've noticed that people are generally more confident in themselves than some other countries I visit. So when they step out and do something, they haven't always got the level of self-awareness to know that they're not connecting with their audience properly. And so here's the analogy that I use, and this isn't directed at Americans by any stretch of imagination. It's directed at everybody, but it applies in certain different ways. Imagine if you tried to watch a YouTube video without an internet connection, it wouldn't work very well, would it?
Right.
And similarly, if you try to talk to a group of people without establishing your connection with them, and we call that rapport, if you don't try and establish the bandwidth of your rapport and grow it out, you'll have no channel over which to give your message, but just as importantly, to actually understand what's coming back from your audience or the other people in the meeting. And so if you want to read whether people are a bit skeptical or they disagree or don't understand, you need to have worked hard to open that channel. And in order to do that, you need to kind of have the self-awareness when you step out to understand that you need to create that relationship with people and not just start reading your script or talking to the slide or whatever it might be. So it's that whole level of self-awareness of thinking, I'm me, I operate in this way. Let me take in some of the audience and work with them.
That's wonderful. What is the number one book you recommend to friends?
I'm going to give you two, actually. One's a very old one and one's a very new one. The very old one is called Questions Are the Answer, and it's by a guy called Alan Pease, who was known as the body language expert many years ago. He used to do TV shows about body language and things. But Questions Are the Answer is a fascinating book because it helps you understand why it's much better to ask people questions that lead them to their own conclusions than it is to kind of give them something. And this is actually the power of storytelling, isn't it? When you tell a story, people draw their own conclusions. I think we all know deep down, whether we acknowledge it or not, that everything we tell ourselves is so much more important and more true than something that somebody else tells us, especially in a sales situation, because they're to be treated with a little bit of suspicion. Yeah, Questions Are the Answer. That's the old one. The newest one is by a guy that I saw speak just last Friday. His name's David J.P. Phillips, and he's the guy behind the most watched YouTube video about death by PowerPoint. It's a TED Talk, and it's been watched by millions of people. His latest book, and I'm not through it yet myself, but I've started it, is called Getting High on Life. And he investigates the different natural hormones in the body, like dopamine, oxytocin, testosterone, and how they affect the way we communicate, and how you can intentionally raise your levels for certain situations. For instance, if you were going into a negotiation, you might want to up your level of testosterone because it's going to help you be a bit more assertive, not in a bad way, but, in a win-win way. On the other hand, if you were going into a presentation where you really need to understand what everybody's giving you, you might look to up your level of oxytocin because that kind of gives you more empathy. And so, for instance, if you looked at a picture of your children for 2 or 3 minutes, that would actually help raise your level of oxytocin before you then go out and speak to people. So the book's called Getting High on Life, and it's all about being able to manufacture these things for everybody's best interest.
I think looking at pictures of my kids 2 minutes before I got into a negotiation would make me a big soft pillow.
Well, that's the wrong way round. That's right.
It would never work. Yeah, so maybe do it on the other side. Presentation. Right? Those are really fascinating. I'd like to read that. I believe, and this is true, I really do believe that everyone has a superpower. What I mean by superpower is there's one part of that pendulum that you were discussing earlier that swings in your direction. And I feel like if you just hold on to that and you double down on that and you focus on that, then you can help others. What do you believe is your superpower?
I believe it is the combination of desiring to help and having empathy with technical people and having enough technical prowess myself to be able to communicate with them on their own level, but being able to guide them to being better communicators. A guy who barely knows me at all. If you talk to him now and he mentioned my name, he probably wouldn't know me. But he's a very clever guy called Daniel Priestley. He's written a number of books, and he ran a program in the UK, I think it's still going, called Key Person of Influence. And it was all about how to become a key person of influence in your industry. After we'd been talking for a few minutes, he said to me, David, communications are your tree. All of the things that you've told me you do are just apples on your tree, like teaching people to speak in public, like telephone systems, like an interest in radio communications. All of these things are apples on a tree of communication. So I think that's where my superpower is that apple on the tree of being able to, but wanting to, and having empathy with technical people.
That's an awesome analogy. What is something that most people don't know about you?
There's an interesting one. I have an unhealthy collection of old Jaguar motor cars. At the peak, it was 9, which was, frankly, too much. I'm down to 4 now. And actually, I want to reduce the collection a little bit further because I'm beginning to realize that there's a thin line between hobby and mental illness. And I think I might have gone a bit too far with it. And they take up a lot of space as well and a lot of money. And so I'm slimming it down. But I think it was the romance of seeing some of the cars that were on the road when I was a younger person and couldn't buy a car and wanting to sort of kind of catch up a little bit. And so my favorite one is a V12 6-litre XJS Grand Tourer. Some of my Jags aren't on the road, but that particular one is, and it's a real joy to drive.
Yeah, that'll do it. I'm a huge car fan. And I think that's true. A lot of us, we want to buy the cars we loved when we were kids. I do have a joke on British motor vehicles, though, if you're into it. There's typically a little bit of an electrical gremlin in a British vehicle. Yeah. Do you know why that is?
No, go ahead.
It's because they build them in the fog. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, David, and for the keynote you gave us earlier this year. I look forward to many other engagements. Tell us the best way to get a hold of you.
LinkedIn is a great way. I'm blessed having this unusual surname, Duffett, D-U-F-F for Freddie, E-T-T for telephone. So if you look for David Duffett with that spelling, I'm pretty sure I'll be on page 1 of your LinkedIn search, and you'll see my little picture there. My website is geekspeakhq.com. That's geekspeakhq.com. And there's information, there's, examples of what I do, and there's a contact form there. So either of those 2 ways, but I would say LinkedIn is my sort of home base. I'm not mega active on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. LinkedIn is where I go.
Well, thank you so much for joining the PreSales Podcast today. Any closing advice?
I think it would be that if you want to get better at communications and presentations, just lean into it and do more of it. Don't run in the opposite direction. Just jump in. Look for opportunities to deliver presentations where they don't exist. Create them. Talk to your boss about problems that you can see at work. And if your boss agrees with those problems, say, I think I could actually help solve one of those by doing a little lunch and learn presentation. Find opportunities.
Love it. All right, David, until next time, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for joining me today on this epic adventure with David Duffett. David speaks all over the globe. You'll likely find him at an in-person event, virtual event near you. We explored 3 of his 7 power presenting protocols. There's so much more to be discussed. One of my biggest takeaways is this: the fear of public speaking is primarily a state of not being prepared. If we have a solid plan, execution is easy. You can find David Duffett on LinkedIn, where he has all the links you need to engage with him. Thank you so much for tuning in. At PreSales Collective, we're about learning, connecting, growing. I believe in investing in these 3 pillars will greatly increase your success and happiness at work and in life. So as David said, let the geek speak. See you next time on the PreSales Podcast.